From South Carolina Public Radio, this is the South Carolina Lede. I'm your host, Gavin Jackson, and this episode was recorded on February 17th, 2025 from South Carolina Public Radio Studios here in Columbia. On this episode of The Lede, we look at what's on tap this week at the Statehouse. We catch up with USC law professor Derek Black to discuss his new book on Black literacy traced over the centuries in the South. And Senator Lindsey Graham was in Europe and in the Middle East. We also have some new comments from him and hear from Fed Chair Jerome Powell following his appearances on Capitol Hill last week. Now, the Lede loves hearing from you. That's why we have our voicemail box set up at 803-563-7169. Let us know what you're up to, what you're doing, what your Valentine's Day was like. We need these answers, folks. Some crutch words that you've been using. We have no presents for Lede's Valentine's Day. Maybe our 600th episode, which is coming up soon. Maybe you can give us something for the 600th. Towner, I'm looking at you. Do they have a 600th card out there? We still have ours from our 500th anniversary, so if you want to get something nice for 600, diamonds, anything, 1041 George Rogers Boulevard, it will get to us. Or just leave us a voicemail at 803-563-7169. It's the same thing. Let's look at what's on tap this week up in Congress. Only the Senate is in, so we'll have some interesting activity with what's going on with the House members when they're free range. Stay tuned for that, but we'll have more on Washington in a moment. There's not much on our economic calendar, but we do have some tidbits below, including on inflation. Not good. But let's look at some activity this week in the Senate.
Yes.
Right on Tuesday, we have a full Judiciary Committee hearing scheduled, including on bills dealing with the VC summer nuclear reactors that could be underway for reconstruction, a little boondoggle right there. And also there's bills dealing with fentanyl-induced homicide, organized retail theft, and storm damage recovery. Over in the Finance Committee, they also meet Tuesday afternoon for several bills, including the Senate version of DOGE. The State Treasurer's Office and the Comptroller General's Office are set to be before a Finance Subcommittee Tuesday afternoon. Now on Wednesday, tort reform is back before a Judiciary Subcommittee, and that afternoon, another subcommittee will take up drunk driving legislation as well. And if you thought the tort reform debate ended, well, it won't. It keeps going on Thursday afternoon, where S-244 will have another hearing. In the House on Tuesday, the Ways and Means Committee will meet in the morning to take up provisos. There will also be a full Judiciary Committee meeting that afternoon where it will take up a hands-free cell phone bill, H 3276. Right now you can't text and drive, but that doesn't stop people from holding their cell phones. This bill would. Now, on Wednesday, there is a full Education Committee hearing, and we expect floor action in the House. And on Thursday, there is a Judicial Constitutional Laws Subcommittee meeting on election-related bills. So a lot of things happening, still getting bills onto the calendars in their respective chambers for debate. But we're moving and grooving out there, folks, as Week 6 gets underway. Now, we know education is still the focus of many policy debates in South Carolina and around the country, from school vouchers like that bill that just passed the Senate, to curriculum debates and book bans like we heard it in our previous episode. But to understand where we are, it's always important to know where you came from, and someone who is great at doing that is Derek Black. He's the director of the Constitutional Law Center at the University of South Carolina's School of Law, and he has a new book out titled Dangerous Learning: The South's Long War on Black Literacy. I sat down with Derek on This Week in South Carolina to learn about the focus on Black literacy and how that was so critical to enslaved people moving up in a world that did nothing but hold them down for centuries and decades after the Civil War. Derek's book starts with the story of the formerly enslaved Denmark Vesey and his attempt to lead a slave revolt in Charleston in 1822. Derek explains and later provides us more modern context for his book.
He is just a remarkable figure. I mean, put away the issues, the policies. I mean, this is a guy that was born into slavery and was working on the side with the blessings of his enslaver and earned enough money to start buying lottery tickets. And he buys a lottery ticket. He wins the lottery ticket at the Bay Street Lottery that built the Bay Street, in Charleston, and buys his own freedom. I mean, what a story. But he then uses his free time after that to really drill down in reading, and he's reading all the newspapers. Charleston was a heavy literary society city, one of the oldest libraries in the country. He's awash in books. And he's reading these congressional debates, and I think the one that really sort of caught his attention was the debates around 1820 and whether Missouri is going to come into the country as a free or slave state. And I think, given what he knew of American ideas, he kind of thought Congress was going to say no more. This is the end of things. But when Congress says, no, Missouri's coming in as a slave state, I think his hopes are dashed. South Carolina had also been restricting the freedom of free people of color, and so he was upset about that as well. So in short, he takes his literacy and starts sharing the good news in the Bible, a different version of the Bible, the Israelites, all of those stories that weren't being taught, and says, look, we need our freedom too. Haiti had recently declared its independence. He writes a letter to the president of Haiti, will you receive us? But the real thesis of that chapter and much of the book was that it's his literacy that makes all that possible. And so he brings together purportedly a list of thousands of free and enslaved people in Charleston who are ready to revolt, and it's really only a last-minute slip of the tongue that leads to that revolt being thwarted.
And why did you start with this story? It is fascinating, especially for folks who don't know about Denmark Vesey and what was going on in Charleston at that time. But why this story? Why did this captivate you so much?
Yeah, there's this general narrative. You ask people, when did black people learn to read and write? And they say, after the Civil War. Because the assumption is it was always criminalized, it was always prohibited. And what I learned through researching the book is that that's just not true. In Charleston in the late 1700s, in the early 1800s, there were schools operating out in the open on the peninsula, educating both free and enslaved black people. This was amazing to me. But after Denmark Vesey's revolt, there becomes a lot of tension about this ability to read and write. But even as late as I think it was 1830, sometime in the 1830s, the Catholic Church in Charleston had restarted. It's kind of like people forgot about Vesey a decade later. They restart a church, and a mob descends on them after some disagreement about other issues there, and insists that they close it down. And that's the end of black literacy in Charleston, and the state criminalizes it, et cetera. And you see this happening in other states as well.
Tell us about that censorship movement and how that was the next, shoe to drop in trying to clamp down on black literacy.
Yeah. Freedom of any sort of reading becomes a big issue after his revolt. So, they called themselves anti-slavery groups at that point rather than abolitionists. They just didn't like the way slavery was proceeding. What we would do, that could be up to debate. But so those early newspaper men operating out of New York and Boston, they decided that a good way to needle Southern politicians was to ship copies of their newspapers to them in the South. And as you might imagine, the Charlestonians, politicians, did not take too kindly of it. So one of the letters was delivered in 1835, and I don't know if it was April, but they deliver it, and one of the politicians sees it. You got to be kidding me. The United States Mail delivered this anti-slavery newspaper. By that evening, they had broken into the Charleston post office, pulled out all the mail, and then were planning a big event on the Army grounds there later, behind the Citadel, which actually was created as a response to Denmark Vesey. So that night the next day they put up a signal balloon. They burn all the newspapers on a town square. They hang William Lloyd Garrison and others in effigy, and say that they're not going to allow the mail to be delivered in South Carolina anymore. This sets off a huge national problem. You've got Southerner as president, Andrew Jackson, being told, he's no sympathizer with slavery, but he believes in federal power, and so you can't just not let people deliver the mail. So this stretches out over the course of weeks. Is the mail going to be delivered in the South or not? Can they break into post offices and steal the papers? During that time, vigilance committees all across the South form and say these newspapers are not going to enter the South.
Education for all, which you write is a black idea, had become public education for some. What was conceived as a means to eradicate the vestiges of slavery had become a tool for perpetuating them. So tell us about how that transition, again, really did not come to fruition.
Yeah, what happened, as I put the pieces together, is all those fears about black literacy during slavery, those same arguments are trotted out after the Civil War. Now, initially, when the Union is here, that's not enough to stop the project. But once the Union retreats, those same fears about black literacy come back. They find that they can't eliminate the schools because guess what? There's a lot of like low-income white families that say, hey, we actually kind of like these public schools. And they thought that we can't just end schools altogether, but what we're going to do is segregate those schools and we will fund them unequally and drastically cut the budget. So, you see this enormous period of expansion, like the number of children enrolled in schools growing exponentially in the decade following the Civil War. But after that, you see flatline and you see falling revenues. So, everyone gets hurt in that process, unfortunately.
Which then takes us up through Jim Crow and then landmark Brown versus Board of Education 1954 to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But then again, still not truly seeing desegregation in schools in South Carolina, at least until early 1970s at the latest, which is basically a generation ago in some respects. I mean, so how do you start shaping that conversation from, pre-Civil War, Civil War, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, Civil Rights Movement to where we are kind of going right now? Do you see some of those underpinnings still in play here when we talk about public education? And we'll get more into this, but just begin that nascent phase right there?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of line up a couple of ideas. I mean, there's nothing about today that's like yesterday. I mean, it'd be wrong for me to say that or like a century ago. But what you see is democracy and opportunity expanding for black people at 3 or 4 major points in history. And each time you see that expansion, right, you see that sort of fear of that expansion. So we move backwards, right? And what I say in the book to try to connect to the current day is we see the biggest expansions since the end of the Civil War happening during the Civil Rights Movement, right? From the 60s into the 70s. But then we start to slide backwards again. So I think we tried to get another restart on this sort of expansion of the way we teach our kids and make everyone welcome following, the murders of George Floyd and others. And, for a couple of years, you sort of felt this movement, right, to change the way we think about schooling and to change the way we think about the way we relate with children and each other. And there were flaws in that. I'm not saying that was all perfect. I have my own critiques of some of the ideas we came up during that period, but the backlash against that is enormous. And so I think we're living in the backlash to sort of an attempts to step forward. What I don't know, and what I say in the book is, are these the last dying gasps of the forces that shut down black literacy in 1830s in South Carolina? Or, is this a new onslaught that's really going to drive us back to a worse place than we were just a few years ago? I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know that 90% of South Carolinians graduated from the public schools. I hope 100% believe in those schools, whether they graduated from them or not. And I know that for over 2 centuries, public education has been a foundation of democracy. So I think it's something we really have to take seriously, our commitment to those public schools.
That was USC Law Professor Dr. Derek Black on his new book from Yale University Press, Dangerous Learning, The South's Long War on Black Literacy. To truly understand public education in the South, you must read his 2020 book, Schoolhouse Burning. Now, shooting up to Washington, Senator Lindsey Graham is set to bring the so-called skinny budget resolution to the floor this week, along with the blessings of Senate Majority Leader John Thune. Now, you heard Graham speak about this in our last pod / probably nearly all of our pods, but that is because this is a way for the Senate to get some early Trump administration wins in as it comes to the border, energy, and national security to the tune of $300 billion. So a light lift there for the Senate. So we'll see how this turns out once this resolution is funded by other committees. But Graham is on a kodo right now to Israel, and he was meeting there with Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's because he was already halfway around the world at the Munich Security Conference that he regularly attends. Now, during that conference, Graham spoke at a function hosted by Politico and its star columnist, Jonathan Martin, who had the senior South Carolina senator for about 30 minutes. Now, we're not going to play all 30 minutes of Lindsey Graham because people have been telling me, please, not so much. But Graham made news with this tidbit on Ukraine and NATO membership, as well as sanctions against China. Here's a skinny clip of Graham.
So the three things we didn't do in 2014, Jonathan, we better do when this war ends. We better make sure that we economically integrate with Ukraine as a tripwire. If we do a minerals agreement where there are American businesses all over Ukraine, it's harder to invade. We need to continue to build up the capability of the Ukrainian military, arm them to the teeth, give them a bunch of F-16s, give them capability that would make it really hard to invade again. That's the form of deterrence. And if you can't get them into NATO right now, my idea with Boris Johnson is to be really clear. Tell Putin, if you ever do this again, if there's another incursion by Russia into Ukraine, that leads to automatic admission into NATO by Ukraine as a tripwire. And if you do those three things, he won't invade. If you don't, we'll be right back where we started.
Have you talked to President Trump about that?
No,
third
not
thing?
the third one. I talked with Boris, but this is really like.
You think he'd be up for that?
Well, this is really kind of classic Trump stuff.
Yeah.
There are some countries that are nervous about putting Ukraine in NATO because we don't. Let's don't give them tanks. That'd be provocative. Let's don't give them jets. The whole place has been like almost annihilated. Forget about being provocative.
Yeah.
Be strong. There's two things that you can't do. You can't be weak and you can't appease.
Yeah.
Now, you can be strong and appease, but if you're weak, you're going to get more aggression. So what I'm hoping to happen here is that we can find a way here fairly soon to end this war in a fashion you don't have a third invasion that will make China less likely to invade Taiwan. So, making news today, here's what I'm going to do with China. I've got sanctions and tariffs laid out against China if they invade Taiwan. It's going to be pre-invasion sanctions. I'm going to introduce them in the Senate. I'm going to tell China, if you go in and forcibly take Taiwan or try to, here's what comes your way. That's not being provocative. That's being reestablishing deterrence. We have lost deterrence when it comes to the bad guys.
Like you're going to get a podcast without a Graham quote. Come on, the guy's literally everywhere. His past 8 days were like the Super Bowl, Congress budget stuff, Europe, sitting next to Zelensky and NATO's root, and then Israel. He's basically a second Secretary of State, but with a little bit more domestic power. Don't tell Rick Grinnell. But we got to do a little bit of from Lindsey to econ because guess what? They're all kind of connected here, folks, and that's what everyone wants to talk about. So we're going to talk about it. Inflation, you know, the I word we've been talking about for some time. Well, it's up to 3% in January, according to the Department of Labor. That's right. Prices ticked up 0.5% month over month. Core prices, which remove volatile food and energy prices, rose 0.4% from December, the largest increase in nearly 2 years. And core inflation, again, without that food and energy costs, that was up 3% year over year. And again, egg prices rose more than 15% due to a bird flu outbreak that I was promised was going to be over. I thought we could control nature, and I'm being told nature finds a way. Nature and inflation just finds a way. They can't control it. Okay. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell was before committees in Congress last week giving his semi-annual address on monetary policy issues. One such committee he was before was Senator Tim Scott's Senate Banking Committee, where he addressed several issues, including some he couldn't give much commentary on, but that's not going to stop anyone from asking. And first up is the future of rate cuts, which, with stubborn inflation, see above, don't expect that anytime soon.
With our policy stance now significantly less restrictive than it had been, and the economy remaining strong, we do not need to be in a hurry to adjust our policy stance. In considering the extent and timing of additional adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the FOMC will assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. As the economy evolves, we will adjust our policy stance in a manner that best promotes our maximum employment and price stability goals.
Powell said the president does not have the power to remove anyone from the Federal Reserve Board or him, and he was also asked about tariffs and their relationship to inflation by Arizona Democrat Ruben Gallego.
So as you know, we don't do tariff policy and we don't do commentary on tariff policy. I think just generally, when somebody's got to pay the tariff, and it can be the exporter, it can be the importer, right. It can be a middleman, and it
Somebody
can be the
pays
consumer.
for it, though.
Somebody does, but
Right.
in some cases it doesn't reach the consumer much. In some cases it does, and it really does depend on facts that we haven't seen yet.
But that also contributes to some of the calculations on inflation overall.
It can, but
It's hard to predict.
There's a question of how persistent that would be and how large it would be.
As for government spending and increasing debt amid talks of budget reconciliations and DOGE and eliminating agencies and positions, well, Powell said this about spending, and it's kind of nothing new.
Yeah, we don't comment on fiscal policy other than to say that, as my predecessors have said, that the U.S. federal budget is on an unsustainable path. It's not that the level of spending or the level of the debt itself is unsustainable. It's that the path is unsustainable, and ultimately the level of the debt will be. So there's no time like the present to start working on this. The longer we wait, the more painful it will be. It's something we need to do and will have to do in the long run, and the short run is better than the long run for that.
That was Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell there testifying before Congress last week. Welcome to the wind down section, our little break from the news. We're glad you're here. A.T. Shire, lead producer, is here too.
Yep.
Another Eagles jersey on. He's still living high, folks.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Gavin. I'm wearing a Brian Westbrook number 36 black alternate jersey circa 2005.
Oh,
that's right.
Okay, the occasion, just still celebrating.
Back when they made them to not fit at all. This is an adult medium that I'm wearing.
Okay.
It goes almost to my knees.
Very much an adult XL, I'm
Yes,
seeing.
it is. They would make them back then to go over pads, even if you were a regular person. And I've decided something, Gavin. I've decided that after the Super Bowl win, I'm just going to burn through my whole Eagles closet. I'm wearing it all. I got like 14 or 15 more days of this, a few more episodes.
Sure.
Okay? I'm just going all the way through. I have all this junk. I'm wearing the junk.
Why keep the good china in the cupboard?
Thank
Wear
you.
it. Use it, guys.
We're using the china, folks.
You call it junk. I say, look at that beautiful jersey I've never seen you wear before.
Yes, Brian Westbrook, Villanova Zone. We love him, folks, don't we?
Yeah, keep it going. I mean, it's your month to celebrate.
It's
a safe
much
space.
Much like a birthday month, it's a Super Bowl month. But
It's my birthday month.
it's neither here nor there, Gavin.
No one said anything about my birthday month.
Speaking of, no one has sent us any presents. Okay?
Guys, we are in birthday month territory.
600th episode.
600.
Valentine's Day.
Yes,
Here we
yes.
are creating content for you constantly. And no present. But we did get a call. And that's what I'm trying to get
very,
to.
Very good.
Trying to
little
land this
nibble.
first part of the plane. If you're ready, Gavin, we got a call.
Yes, take her in.
Okay, here we go.
Hey, gentlemen. My name is Amy, and I get the Newberry Observer. I think that should be your new request for anybody who calls in, is make people tell them what local newspaper they support. My grandparents met at a local newspaper, Independent, Missouri, so I wouldn't be here without local papers. I am a transplant. I don't know what we're called in South Carolina. I moved from Boulder, Colorado to Prosperity, South Carolina. Same, exactly the same. So I'd love you guys to do a segment on things that have tripped up us outsiders moving to South Carolina. I'd love it here. But 3 different times, I do not know what dinner means. People, Facebook Marketplace pickup, repair people be like, I'll be there after dinner. And I'm like 6 or 7 o'clock at night? No, in the afternoon. That's what it means. So thanks, you guys, for your work. Whenever we move, we always listen to our local PBS, NPR stations to find out what's going on, and you guys have definitely helped us get acclimated to South Carolina. We love it here. Feel free to call me if you got any questions.
Amy, thank you for calling. Thank you for repping your local newspaper. That is a great way to get acclimated to, on top of listening to your NPR station and, of course, wonderful podcasts that we produce. Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
I have to imagine, though, that the the geography,
The culture shift.
the topography, if you will, of Boulder to Prosperity is a little bit different, but there is a little mountain. Don't forget about Little Mountain.
Little Mountain is correct. It's got one little meager mountain. But
And then you got the lake. I mean, what more
Lake's
could
nice.
you want? It's basically Boulder.
It's a big move. But yeah, you're right. Dinner is lunch here.
Yeah, and that's some local vernacular that I unfortunately do not hear enough of since we were saturated in the big cities of Columbia.
Yeah.
But yeah, the dinner and the supper situation.
Supper.
Yeah.
Supper.
Supper.
Which I don't like.
My grandparents
I
used to
don't
say
like
supper,
the sound
but I never
of it.
understood it, so I didn't.
Hits my ear wrong.
Supper?
Yeah, don't like it.
You want to go get supper?
The supper table sounds like
No,
like
now
a
that you
kid's
say
table.
it,
You know
I don't
what
want
I mean?
any. I would rather go do dinner.
Dinner table.
Yeah,
adult.
hey, dinner.
Supper table, little baby stuff. You
Yeah,
know?
that's just a little tea cozy.
Oh, finger sandwiches.
Oh no, that's on the supper table.
Oh, you mean the supper table? It's in the other room.
The supper club.
Yeah, the Nook.
Yeah.
Don't like it. Don't like it.
Breakfast nook
Soft.
turns the supper club.
But yeah, I'm not good at taking on the Southern isms as like a hard Northeastern guy. You know what I mean? Like
Some things will never die. For
Caitlin
me.
is great. Caitlin is great.
She say buggy?
She says y'all
I say y'all.
instead of saying
you guys.
put that away. She says put it up,
Put it up.
which is crazy to me.
That is.
She says cut off the lights. This is
the one that's gone back a while.
This is a lady who has she grew up in New Jersey.
Yeah.
She says talk and dog and mall, but she also says cut off the lights.
She also runs a bar, so she also.
Yeah, she hears it all the time. Yeah. But
I just say yeah.
I can't say y'all. I feel very insincere, like a phony, which is like my least favorite thing, being a poser.
No, yeah, well, we've already talked
I
about
feel
this generation not
like
even
I feel
caring
like
about that.
a poser.
I think that was probably the easiest lift for me, but for my family, they still have hard situations with that. And Nick, he still says you all intentionally.
Yeah.
I need to check in with
He's not
Colin
gonna
since
sully himself
since he's
with the
been
contraction.
west of the Mississippi for a while. I'm sure there's no. I mean, he's wearing boots and like cowboy belts. So if you're not keeping up with the vernacular and doing all that, then you are cosplaying.
That's tech.
So you got to get the words and the outfits there too. But I'm sure he's fine with it.
The sort of thing that's like my culture's not your costume type deal.
Thank you.
Like I feel like
Cultural
if
appropriation.
I say y'all,
Yeah.
the room will stop and turn and they'll be like, "What did you just say? You phony!"
I think you think that, but I think we've been here for so long that it's expected, and it's. If you say you guys, that'll be a little bit more jarring. I would feel like people would still respect
I say
it either
you guys
way.
all the time. I feel
Yeah.
so bad about it, but I do say it all the time.
Y'all is such an easy phrase that's why I've
It
just
is.
kind of
It is.
I've accepted it. I crave efficiency in my little German brain. To an extent,
Yes.
but like y'all, it's like that's easy done. I so much so that I don't put the apostrophe because that annoys me. I also like to say reckon. Oh, you reckon we do that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this
Like
up.
that one, it takes time for me to get to.
Reckoning
but
is
I'm
great.
getting to it, and I've been here since 2011. So like, it takes time to come up with the words that you feel comfortable using as a transplant, Amy. It's okay.
My favorite is might, could, or might, should.
I could.
You might could do that. You might should do that.
No,
Like-
sir, no, ma'am. I love watching parenting in the South.
Yeah.
Even though I don't think it really works as well as it does up north. That's not for here.
I will say that what really takes time getting used to in the South as a Northerner is like we get a lot of guff as Northerners as we all sound mean, We sound mean
course.
and are nice.
Yeah.
But you have to get through the crusty exterior of having to deal with the snow. But down south,
flip it.
everyone sounds nice. And not everyone is as nice as they sound.
Which is, I mean, honestly, like talk about masterclass right
Yes.
there. That's what you need to learn to master.
Yes.
That's what we're forever learning.
Yes,
And that's
bless
why you
your heart.
realize you're like, oh, no. I was not aware of your game.
The ethos of bless your heart is
Alone,
is,
yeah.
is very deep and nuanced, and that's something that as being from away, which is another Southern thing, that is something that you got to get used
but
to.
I'm never going to go get a buggy.
No,
'Cause
buggies are
like a
carts.
stagecoach,
They are
I mean.
carts. Yeah, buggies. No, thank you. We're gonna leave it at that, but we're gonna put this show up. Okay, we're gonna cut off the lights and put this one up. So, Gavin,
Yo, hush.
y'all
Yo, hush.
get busy on drinking your milk, everybody. Gavin, do the outro, brother.
You think lunch lady was going to cut the lights off or something?
I'm gonna cut off the lights if everybody doesn't get busy on your milk.
Words to live by. I don't know. What else would you need to live by besides such insightful advice right there? But thank you all for listening. Show us your appreciation like Amy did by leaving us a voicemail at 803-563-7169 or review on Apple Podcasts. And you can always stay up to date with the latest news on SCTV.org and SouthCarolinaPublicRadio.org. And be like Amy, don't forget to support your local newspapers. The South Carolina Lede is a production of South Carolina Public Radio. Our producer is A.T. Shire. Amy Crouch is our supervising producer. Sean Birch is our executive producer. This podcast is produced with support from PRX and is made possible in part by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, as well as listener contributions to the ETV Endowment of South Carolina. For the South Carolina Lede, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina. What is this device you speak into?
Doth it record my soul?
Methinks 'tis evil, which? Oh, 'tis very evil sounds of me.
Ooh, my voice.